API Resilience podcast. It's our belief that APIs are central in the changing business landscape that has been named digital transformation, and that digital transformation through APIs offers the opportunity for a dramatic shift in how companies can work together and participate in creating value. We've invited guests from many different types of organizations and asked them to share insights from their journeys and their API programs, as well as the challenges, objectives, and approaches as they endeavor to make their companies and communities more resilient.
If you have been integrating with us for a while, you know exactly where to find stuff because it's convenient and consistent for you. But if you're new, then where do you start? I think we did a pretty good job by saying, okay, but this is how you start, this is how you get authenticated, etc. Just as a good starting point. I think one of the main topics now is that we want to focus on giving our customers a better price. But if you want retailers to offer better prices, then you have to tell them, what is the right price? What is my competition really doing? And how can I automate that easily? Yeah, so naming things is an art form, but a really important art form.
Now let's listen to today's conversation. Hello and welcome to this episode of the API Resilience podcast. I'm Mark Winberry with my co-host Christoph Van Thoma, and today we're talking with a really interesting guy, Maarten Roosendaal from bol.com, B-O-L.com. And Maarten has been an IT architect and has now moved into the position of being a product manager and product owner of the retailer API at bol.com. So welcome, Maarten, and thank you for joining us.
Hi, Mark. Hi, Christoph. Thanks for having me. Nice to be here.
I'm really excited about hearing your story about this transition that you're going through, what was driving it and the role of APIs in it, and then also the role of the developer portal in enabling it. That is kind of, for me, the core takeaway that I am seeing. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, that makes sense. They're quite disconnected in actuality, but I can start at the beginning to tell you a bit more about the background into our transition into a product-like organization. So I think we started off as a small e-commerce book company, right, with just selling books like 20 years ago. And then like a successful e-commerce company, we started to grow really rapidly, which also meant a really rapid growth from an architectural perspective and moving from monoliths to services to microservices. Our microservice landscape started to become so complex that we have over 1,000 components. Not all microservices, but 1,000 IT components. And what we lost along the way was the coherency. So how do things fit together when you're talking about a process? So where is my package from a customer's perspective? Sounds like a really easy question, but when you look under the hood, it takes about 20 microservices and 4 or 5 IT teams to figure out the correct answer because you have lost a mail, you have returns, you have the actual order, where's the track and trace, where's the actual shipment in the process. So under the hood is not a trivial answer. But from an IT perspective or from a consumer perspective, it was really difficult to find that answer. And at one point we said, okay, we started growing so fast. And then we said, okay, but then we have so many dependencies. So we're sort of drunk on drinking coffee all the time with each other to manage things. So one of our goals was, I think 3 years ago, is to how can we be agile at scale? That was one of the primary goals. And then secondary to that is how can we organize our organization and our architecture such a way that we have a better overview of how our company works. So what do we actually provide for our consumers? What are actually the main building blocks in that aspect? And that's where the idea of escaping the build trap by Melissa McCarthy, I think, was the writer, that started talking about, okay, but helping your company really think about what is your outcome, what do you produce, and what are then the products that you have, and how to organize our products really started to resonate with us. So we had the agile at scale part, and then the product part that sort of started mixing together, which we now see was a bit too much, but that's another story. But out of that came that we needed to reorganize how we see what we deliver. So how do we organize our products, and what are the actual boundaries of the products? And if we wanted to move forward to a product type organization from an organizational perspective, so what does that mean from an architectural perspective? And then we say, okay, but if you have a product and your product contains your features and functionality, then it would be logical to think about the concept of a product API, right?
Yeah.
If you want to touch a certain functionality, then you have to go through a product API. I think one of the few goals we had behind that is to encapsulate complexity for the outside world. Like having the question, where's my package? You just have one entry point because there's a product that's all about order processing or customer order processing. So that product knows exactly where it is. But also for teams inside the product to be a bit more autonomous and not linked to the outside world all the time. But also to create a sort of a more concept of more a consumer-driven type mindset. I think we, like I said in the presentation, we are a very user interface oriented company. We like to build GUIs because then we can see things, but that's also how we engineer stuff, and we take lots of shortcuts. Then my domain, the public API part came into play, and that has gotten so much traction that it generates, or that almost 70% of our Plaza share, that's the marketplace share, goes through the API, which is a really big part.
That's huge.
That's really big. And so there was a mismatch into how we were organized inside, how the components were organized inside, and how we had to, like I said in the presentation, build a tank to sort of help the outside world connect to our platform. And really sort of figure out how stuff worked internally, who did we have to talk to, build all kinds of mapping and aggregation to actually make it work. While in fact you would rather have a set of X amount of clear products with clear APIs, with clear responsibilities. Just say, okay, but this is my functionality, and you use it as is. It has the best developer experience from a product perspective. Here's the documentation. The APIs are consistent throughout our company, and you can just expose them to the outside world, right? That would be the ideal world. But we've seen that although we are moving slowly towards a product type organization, we still have the mindset of a user interface oriented company. And we see some improvements, and we see lots more people talking to their consumers more from an API perspective and more a functionality perspective and process perspective. But we still have a long way to go.
Yeah.
So I think that's sort of the summary where we are right now.
It sounds like, well, I'm sure you're familiar with Conway's Law. I keep introducing it, but...
we use that as an example of we started a small company, we grew. So we had to, Conway's Law says that we had to adapt our architecture towards it. And now we're growing again. So again, we say, Conway's Law says we have to adapt our architecture towards the new circumstances. Yeah.
So, does that mean that you're already building teams around those products that are,
Yes, we do. So the core question is, what is a product, right?
Right.
And that's still a fundamentally difficult question for us, because a product is, if you look at the literature, it's about something tangible and something that a customer would pay for.
Yeah.
But if you look at it from that, then we have basically two products, which is buying at bol.com and selling through bol.com, right? But those are really big products. So we have maybe sort of have sub-products like search and entire order processing. But we defined those products as having an organizational and a technical component, and sort of balancing in what can be organized in a proper way, because it can't be too big, it can't be too small. If it's just one service, is it then really a product, or should it be part of a bigger product? So really defining what a product is still an ongoing challenge for us. But we've said that on a product API level, we introduced the concept of a product API team, which is responsible with a product manager, a tech lead, a product architect, and a team to build basically the gateway into the product for the outside world.
Do you think you're ever going to get into the APIs first and then the interfaces follow the APIs? Or is that something that's coming? Or
with API first, you mean, what do you mean exactly with that?
I mean that the APIs define your architecture, and they're the constraints through which you communicate between different teams, so that the individual teams can do their own stuff and be more free. But like the interfaces in between them are more set. And then the user interface is some sort of derivative of the API and can also evolve more rapidly.
Yeah, good question. Yeah, we focused. I think that's one of the primary sort of guiding principles for this is try to be consumer first. So we developed an entire program which is called the Apex API Excellence Program around it to help support those newly formed products to help them migrate into what we want. What it actually is still evolving, but the starting point is start with your consumer first. So what do they need? How does this process look like? And then from that, derive which functionality, which features, and from that, start with your API. That's when your API design starts. And you have consumers. Yeah, you shouldn't be really focusing on one channel. You should be just a product with an API that can be consumed by multiple channels. For example, the retail API or our web shop or apps or whatever. And that's really our mindset. But it's more of a cultural thing as well, right? So maybe more than anything, it's really hard to change from a user interface oriented company with all the AP testing, experimenting on that side, UX part to more a consumer API first company. That's quite a mind shift. That proves to be difficult because we see a lot of people telling, but now we are doing things API first. Yeah, you're saying that you're doing API first, but in practice, it's still a bit off. Well, it's going better, but it's a transition.
Yeah, I keep talking about this, and I laughed about it because for me, it was like a really inspiring session at our Chicago conference a couple of years ago by Jenny Wanger, who talked about the UX of DX, which was basically like, how can you use the standard UX toolset to go and build a great developer experience? And thinking about APIs as like a user interface, basically, and that you are designing a user interface. So you need to make sure that people actually understand how it works.
Yeah, and that's why we focus a lot on trying to understand the consumer first, right? How does their process work? I think we recently started migrating because we have a proposition which is called you can do shipments through our warehouses, right? And if you do that, you can just ship your stuff to our warehouse and we do everything for you. Yeah. But there's a process of getting your stuff to our warehouse. And we recently revamped the API for that, which is called a Replenishment Api. And we did that with a team that was more focused on warehousing, etc. So when they actually came up with the first set of API designs, and we tried to figure out, okay, but how would this actually work for a consumer, right? For a retailer. So I'm a retailer and I want to send stuff to the warehouse, but how do I know to which warehouse I need to send what? Okay, but that wasn't in the API anywhere in a clear way. So that was already the first fault because they think from, okay, what would I think a retailer need or what would I need from a warehousing perspective instead of what would my consumers really need and going through the process with your consumers. And that's really challenging because the API should really read like a functional flow, right? I need to do stuff. Okay, I can do that, and then I can do that. Okay, that's easy. But if you haven't talked to your consumers about this or validated this, then you make too many assumptions that we've seen too often, unfortunately.
It always comes down to empathy and just like learning to communicate clearly, and even in API design, which is so fascinating.
I don't believe some people say if your API is not clear from for example the redoc or the interface itself, then your API is not clear enough. I would say that's not entirely true. Sometimes with complex processes, you need a bit more functional documentation. That's why we're lucky we had a tech writer coming on board a few months ago, which has really helped us to get the documentation to the next level. And just in terms of writing, how do you write something? When you're from a Dutch perspective, you have a tendency to write in a certain way. But luckily, we have now a US/UK type tech writer who really understands the language. And you see in the documentation that the sentences are now more coherent. They make a better whole. So that was one of the improvements that we had on our side, which was really, really nice. But yeah, we needed to do that to better the developer experience and to better clarify certain functional processes and how we wanted our partners to integrate with.
There's so much involved in the API spec that just knowing the specification doesn't give you the full picture. There's an entire model behind it of which each API and all of the parameters are components of, but you really need something at a higher level to help someone grok the picture before you can dive into the API specs and really get what you need. So,
I think we did get a really nice compliment from an integrator, which type of partner, which is called Channel Advisor. They hook up different marketplaces all over the world, and they actually said that we had the best functional documentation of any type of marketplaces they've seen. So there was quite an opstaker, as we call it in Dutch. So if we had that in the pocket, that shows that the effort we put into it really helps. But documentation and just providing better context is so important because we have a certain intent with it. Of course, to help our partners, but the integration has a certain intent. If you don't explain the intent, then you get lots of calls from partners like, "What is this? How do I need to use this?"
And the tricky thing is that it's like a multi-layered bootstrap process where you need some initial information to be able to understand the next layer of information, which you need to be able to understand like the next layer and the next layer. Like, and sometimes people that are already familiar with the underlying layers, they're like, okay, just cut this stuff. I already know this. Just give me the juice. That's always a tricky one. It's like, how do you communicate the different layers without also boring people that already know how it's going to work?
Well, that's a good one. Yeah, because we have, of course, different type of partners, right? We have the actual retailer who builds his own custom integration. We have different type of integrators who build integration with different kind of marketplaces all over the world, which retailers can join. We have more data-driven companies who use our APIs to derive certain information with which to produce insights, which they can then resell. We're going to have advertising and agencies coming up, and they all have sort of different knowledge level. And if you have been integrated with us for a while, you know exactly where to find stuff because it's convenient and consistent for you. But if you're new, then where do you start? I think we did a pretty good job by saying, okay, sort of simple how to start. This is how you start. This is how you get authenticated, etc. Just as a good starting point. And the navigation clearly states if you want to do something else, then just click on it and go there. But it's a really interesting thing. So have you seen companies that really do that well?
With API documentation? I think it is actually a fundamentally human problem. Because this is actually, this question lies at the foundations of like intelligence and cognition, I think, even. Because I think cognition is a bootstrapped, iterative, like bootstrapped process. We've seen some research into this. Michael Meng from Merseburg University, he did some research about or you have developers with different levels of proficiency. Are they successful at doing what they need to do if you give them more information or less information, and some of this? But actually, an organization that's really good at it, I don't have a practical example myself. Maybe our UXers would know, like, okay, that's a good one. Yeah, I think it's fundamentally a hard problem.
Yeah.
Because it's like, for example, dunning. So if you have recurring payments, dunning and recurring payments is like the process through which you can eliminate customers if their credit cards, like they're definitely not going to upload a new credit card, and like you've gone through this whole process to make sure that they don't want to stay a customer, but you really have to kick them out. And if you don't know that is an existing thing, then you don't even go look for it. You just start building something on your own, and you start using like lower level APIs to figure out your own way of doing this thing. It's like, how do you know when somebody needs a certain piece of information so that you're going to save them time in doing their job? And this is a fundamental issue that lies at the heart of most problems in this space, probably not just in this space. If you're talking about enterprise IT, it's the same problem. It's like, how do you prevent people from reinventing the wheel again, just because they didn't know the right word for it? And I think it's a problem of signaling that there's a certain piece of information that you need to know about, and discoverability, the ability to find information based on certain keywords that are connected to it.
Two things that makes me think of is one is a kind of a joke from the Drupal community that I've spent a lot of time in, and it's that everyone who works on Drupal first wrote their own CMS in PHP because it was so obviously easy, and suddenly they start discovering all that is actually a lot of work. Yes, the core is easy, but the rest is a lot of work. And when I think about what you're trying to do with documentation and helping people grok your APIs, it seems to me that there's a balance that you have to strike between this natural progressive disclosure that conceptual learning requires, as well as the agile principle of being able to drive a spike and do an end-to-end to see all the pieces lined up. And doing those two things is a little bit of a challenge from the spike standpoint and the progressive disclosure standpoint. If you think about, peeling an onion, somewhere between peeling the onion and driving the hole, you kind of come into this conical shape thing where on the outside, the first layer, you know more, and then at the stuff that you might get to later, you only know a little bit about. But it's a challenge.
If you have some time, I would like your input or when you think about your ideas and how that applies or does not apply to our side. It's sort of, that would be interesting, because I think we did spend some time on, we have a separate page about our concepts, right? What's a product, what's an offer, to explain the basic concepts. And we have a page about the basic flow. If you want to get started, you first have to upload offers, then you can start doing orders. That's the core thing. And if you want to do more, then do this. So sort of trying to build the onion in that sense, and trying to make more sense for the outside world and not just try to cater for different persons, because we don't have a personalized or partner personalized web developer portal, which you can log in and then only that information that applies for you at that moment shows up, right? That would be really awesome, but maybe 20 years in the future, yes. But for now, that would be too difficult.
Like personalization for documentation is a very interesting question. I think it's a little bit like the Clippy problem, because you need to be very, very careful that you don't become paternalistic and you're like, I know this better than you know. So let me just give you the information you want. It's like, no, I didn't want that. I think it's a lot about keeping people in the driver's seat so that they don't feel that they're being forced to take a little loop around the corner just because somebody thought that this would be the right thing. And I think a lot is also just research and knowing who are the different personas that you're interacting with, and making sure that your main personas have a good journey through your portal, and that you have call to actions that will take them to where they need to be.
I think we need to sort of improve a bit on that, because we think we know who our partners are. Mm-hmm. And we have certain personas, but personas from a higher level perspective. But I would really like to focus also a bit more on our API personas, right? We have different type of API consumer personas as well. And I think I've just been reading a book about product management, right? And one of the first things you need to do is, who are your consumers, or customers basically, and try to derive certain profiles from them, which you can basically hang on the wall and say, okay, for whom is this really relevant? And what do you need to do for that? So that's one of the things I would like to work on in the next half year. To better understand our consumers, because it's always an excuse. We're so busy, especially the last year. With the corona, it's like a Christmas full year round, right? In terms of load. That's sort of really good in some sense. But it also, you also lose a bit of focus on more the mid and long term range. And better understanding our consumers, and also having more interviews with consumers. I like one-on-one interviews more than surveys. Is really helpful in that. So hopefully I can spend more time on that to understand them better.
I'm curious to know, you've talked about your partners consuming your APIs, but do you have any end users who have any reason to consume your APIs? Christoph, I'm trying to get to that topic that we've been
the interface.
The interface. So we're starting to see dev portals and API programs as evolving into interface programs. And so if you think of the various ways that your partners and your customers and your internal users need to interface with your company's systems, you take a broader view and you start embracing low and no code solutions like AppSheet and Zapier. One of our clients at Pronovix is a Belgian bank that did a really cool thing where they actually enable their small business partners to offer customized services to the end consumer through a QR code. And the QR code is product specific, and it allows the consumer to scan the QR code and have a pre-populated credit application to the bank. So they're bringing three parties together. They're bringing the bank, the consumer, and the vendor together in this one solution. And it's super cool. I'm blown away by these types of solutions and the clever things that people do who aren't engineers, who aren't software developers, but you give them if then that and something like AppSheet and Zapier's, and they start doing really cool things.
So like I could imagine, like, for example, a QR code on the photocopier machine that launches a form to request more paper or something like that. Or like some of these things that can automate business flows for smaller businesses where they don't have the money to spend on custom development work. But where, like, once the solution has been created, this can now also be used by other customers, and it can become kind of like a commons kind of thing. Did you see something like that?
I'm trying to think real hard. So most of our people who use our APIs are sort of know what they do, sort of mostly programmers who integrate with their own e-commerce systems. Sometimes you have a nephew who builds an Attic integration, right? But that's also a technical integration. I haven't really seen anyone playing around with that side of the API. We do have what we call an open API that has been around there since 2009, 2010. It was more oriented towards, we didn't have an app at that moment, I think 2009, 2010, but we wanted to give the outside world the opportunity to build their own websites and apps. But think about it, those were also still developers who built a QR type or a specific website with specific content in it. But it sounds really, really fascinating. Would love to hear a bit more about how they actually did that and who and what type of person did that. But I think if you work with us, so you want to have sort of an open ecosystem, right, with all building blocks, and you just want anyone playing around with that and coming up with great solutions. Yeah. And I think we had a few years ago, we developed an API game workshop, which was really fun. But one of the parts of the API game workshop was, okay, here you have 25 public APIs in terms of small papers. Here you have 10 or 15 of our APIs. Now go build something. Mm-hmm. And what came out, so we had the NASA API and the Chuck Norris API combined with our recommendation API. You will get lots of great ideas. That would be really fascinating. But in terms of low code or no code, no, we haven't seen much interaction with that. But that would be really nice to see how we can focus on that. But I think it also has to do with what do we want, what do we strive for as a company. And I think one of the vision of Bol.com is to make daily lives for customers and partners as easy as possible. And that would actually fit.
It would fit it.
That would fit that perfectly. But no, it would be really. But I know a bit about low code and no code, and I know you have sort of frameworks for that. But I'm a bit too unfamiliar with that to really see right now how that would work for us.
Because like there's very specific no code. Normally when people talk about it, it's like this very specific thing. It's like an interface, or it's like a visual programming language or something. And you can, without knowing development, you can like put something together. So but that's like a more advanced thing. But I think there's another aspect to this, which is like basically what we're trying to do is, or I think what we're doing today as an IT sector is We are trying to make it so that less people have to be dealing with transferring messages between themselves, so that you can automate that process of transferring messages and get the message to the right person or the right system, so that people don't have to be busy with that, and they can focus on more creative work, and they can focus on important stuff that is not just passing messages through. Like Mark, you had on one of our internal calls, you had this saying like, I don't want it to be a project for somebody to get me a certain piece of information. I'm sure you're selling a lot of stationary stuff, like stationery, like paper and stuff for office supplies and things like that. And I'm just brainstorming. The process of ordering stationery, that is probably in a lot of small businesses, that's like the manager who still, or the owner who still needs to approve something. And maybe, some of this could be automated. There's, I'm just some crazy idea, but and then the idea of the interface economy is that, so we have the APIs, and these are like developer tools, and to look at these as APIs, these developer tools, to look at them as discovery tools that allow you to go out there and let people do interesting things, and then recognize like, oh, here's some interesting space that we hadn't thought about. Let's develop an experience around that space, so that other people that need that kind of solution can build similar experiences, not by starting from scratch from the API, but like by using building blocks, like maybe a user interface or a little website or a widget or a QR codes or something like that. And like you put them all together in one place, and you can say like, okay, so if you're a small business owner and you would like to work with Bol.com to automate your stationary order flow, then here's a bunch of solutions. You're big enough, here's the API, and you can like go wild. You're a little bit smaller, here's this widget that you can put into your intranet. Now, you don't even have an intranet, here's our QR code. So something like that.
No, I really like the idea. And I think maybe I think it has to do a bit of maybe the focus that we have. Like what we do have, for example, we did have a Magento plugin, which you could simply plug into your Magento stuff. But we sort of outsourced that Magento plugin because, again, of focus. And I think I really like this idea of having those more building blocks, but which you see, and that's what I wanted to do with the open API as well, right? We haven't spent much time on it, but I can really think of cooperation with companies like building a shop with augmented reality with our open API, with our recommendations, combined with Uber or something to deliver it. All that kind of stuff, right? That developing new business models around it. But I think our company is right now is at a state where we have to focus on growing our ecosystem with what we have in terms to fight off Amazon and Alibaba, etc. Right? So that's what we really need to focus on. And this is really interesting, but we haven't. This is not part of our DNA yet to think about it in that way. But I think it's really important to discover things we haven't discovered yet to make stuff happen.
I think that's so. If you go to the ocean, you're fighting with whales. If you go to coral reef, you're among the small fishes. And I think the big advantage we have in Europe is that there's a regional market, so there's the European market, but at the same time, there's so many different niches in this market that it's not that easy to come in here and just bulldozer all over it, because there's all these different languages, there's all these cultural differences, there's different legal frameworks, even though that is to some extent standardized. And I think increasing your partner surface and allowing more people to build on top of you for context-specific things that take into account like these differences, the local differences, I think that should be pretty strong competitive advantage that's hard to copy. Like there's always cost that, it's going to be hard to compete against someone with a really, really huge scale, or that is plugging into like the Chinese production market directly. It's always going to be difficult. But I think there's certain aspects of it that make it harder to, they don't have that local scope. They have a global scope that just looks at it differently. We have to see how it plays out.
But in the end, someone has to build something, right?
They do it themselves. So basically, what they're saying is we have business solutions and we have developer solutions. And the business solutions are things that just a regular business person that doesn't know any development can use to create an experience using our products.
No, exactly. So that's, I think, it's a great example where I think we can improve a lot on. But I think we now have, like I said, a user interface like mindset, right? We have our customers, which we want to buy as much stuff as possible, and we have our partners who want to sell using our platform. That's our main and core focus. But like you said, you can strengthen your ecosystem and your competitive advantage against those companies with having these types of functionality, of thinking about it and how can we make stuff easier for them. But I think one of the things we suffer from featureitis. I don't know if you heard about this, but we have a list like 2030 is not enough for the things we're doing today.
Of course.
So it's always about making choices. And what you see is that a lot of these stuff, although it's very interesting, it's interesting, but not
it's
right
not
now.
The urgent thing. Yeah.
And that's something I wish we changed a bit to also spend time in things we need more in the longer run, to play a bit more around with how can we help our ecosystem better. I think we have good focus, but sometimes a bit too much focus on certain aspects. And the second part is we're always looking for resources, right, in terms of people and money. And if you look at the number of job openings that we have now, it's so hard to come by good developers that even if we wanted to do this, we don't have the people to support this right now, because we have just enough people to hold up the foundation and to expand on the foundation. But I really like the idea, though.
We're interested in hearing like how it resonates with people. We think that it's something that's up and coming. So this is also a very interesting data point. It's like this is not the top priority right now.
What I would like is also, because we don't have to build it ourselves, right? We can hook up with companies that can build certain solutions and build a business model on that. So I'm also hoping that in the role that I have now with the new team that we have, is to also see if we can spend time on that. I think we're also working on a proposition with Rabobank and Funder to come up with a certain business model for partners to lend money. So those types of cooperation, those are really interesting, right? Because you don't have to build all the stuff yourself, but you just have to provide the right building blocks to let other companies build those type of propositions that they can resell to others. Because that's basically what the integrators do, right? We build the API, the integrators say, okay, I see a business model where I can help other partners really easy. I just provide them with the user interface they can just drop and drag. And I provide all the technical integration for you. And by the way, I do it for all marketplaces all over the world. That's sort of the business model that I think you might be a bit referring to, but that's still not really low code for just anyone around the corner. But it's sort of a variant on that, I think.
Yeah. One question I want to ask is, the topic of the title of the podcast is API resilience, and we're trying to amplify stories where companies see that they have strengthened themselves by the connections to their partners through their APIs. And in other settings, businesses talk about increasing their stickiness, and that has always felt a little bit bad to me because it reminds me of one of those flypaper traps, where you get stuck, or the hooks are put in you and it's too painful to leave. That's really not what we're looking for. I think we're really looking for creating value by connecting. And so if you think about your APIs and your program, can you tell us if you are achieving that goal, and are you creating new value between you and a partner such that they don't want to leave?
I think it's also like, do you have any good COVID stories? But because I'm sure you do, like that you must have been helping people in these tough times?
Yeah, we have some COVID stories, but not exactly related to APIs. So we did have lots of public, I won't call it marketing, but public initiatives where we had like 50,000 toys for children in poor families. So we have sort of those COVID stories. But in terms of API, it was more about when COVID started, we started seeing an immense spike in our revenue, but also new partners hooking up, right? Because they couldn't sell stuff in their store. So larger companies started to come to us and say, okay, can we use your platform then to sell our stuff? I think we grew, I have to really check the numbers, but I think we grew about 3,000 to 4,000 new API partners in the last few months. So that was really, really incredible. I think we now have almost 14,000 API partners, whereas last year we had maybe 6,000, 7,000. So
Wow.
That was really, really huge. And I think also the integrators, our integrated partners, helped us a lot because they already had a connection. And we have a program with them, with the Platinum Gold, that kind of program. And we send partners to those integrators, right? If you don't have enough money to do it yourselves, then you can use those integrators to do it. But there was more about achieving large volume. And that might have obfuscated maybe your question a bit, Mark. How sticky are we, or how consumer driven are we? I think
I think your growth story there tells the story that yes, APIs made your company more resilient in this tough time. You actually grew because of having it available.
Yeah, that was really good to see that we could help them in such a way. I think we're trying to lower the commission on our platform because in comparison to Amazon, we're a bit expensive. But we're really trying to work hard on lowering that. But also your question, Mark, about more how consumer-driven are we? I think in essence, the retailing stuff you do is you have your offers online and you have your orders, right? Those two things are the core component of retailing on our platform. And I think we've expanded over the years in providing more functionality to compete against others, but to also really listen to our partners, say, okay, what do you really need? For example, I think a year and a half, we added the content API to allow partners to upload content, to manage content. Right? We previously had an FTP solution, but that was sort of hacky and not really what they wanted. And then they're also asking for, give me more insights, and etc. I'm in an area where I'm sort of the middleman between the internal organization and the products and the outside. And what you see is that we want to do stuff for our partners from downstream domains and products, but the focus is often, we have a lot of legacy as well, right? And if we want to build a really large-scale platform, then we have to improve on our fundamentals. And so you see now that we have to spend a lot of time improving on the fundamentals and making it actually scale, that we can't move fast enough, in my opinion. Of course, it's always too slow in terms of what our API customers are really asking for. So I think we provide decent APIs, but I think all our APIs can be improved. I think that sums it up a bit. And of course, adding more functionality, especially about, I think one of the main topics now is that we want to focus on giving our customers a better price, right? But if you want retailers to offer better prices, then you have to tell them, what is the right price? Okay, what is my competition really doing, and how can I automate that easily? Because that would really help them, our partners, say, okay, but if there are like 20 competitors who all offer a low price, then I can say, okay, then I won't offer it anymore because I will never get it. But if there's only one competitor who just is 1 cent cheaper than me, then I maybe can do stuff. But you also need to tell me, so what is sort of the market price for which I can actually offer this on your platform? Because that kind of stuff, that's what they're asking for. But we can't give them that right now because of the fundamentals is not in order. And the products are still being formed, right? The products are always about, so what is your responsibility? What's my responsibility? And that's always a bit of a challenge, especially when you look up the term pricing. What is pricing exactly? And what do you do? Yeah, but that's pricing. But that's also, it's always So what is the exact border between your responsibility and my responsibility? And that's a challenge that we have. But for the outside world, the partners say, just give me some insights. So that's really hard to explain sometimes.
In our preparation notes, you said something really interesting. Consistency trumps autonomy. And
some engineers are going to kill me if they hear this. No. So yeah, I think we have a culture of really autonomous teams, right? I think we're one of the first companies in the Netherlands that started, I think, in 2008 or 9 with implementing Scrum all over. And the first people that went to the Scrum training was the board of directors, right? So it was really a top-down decision to implement Agile and Scrum. But Scrum also meant more autonomous teams, right? And having the team make decisions on what to do, etc. Especially around technical stuff, etc. And that really grew into a sort of autonomous culture. But also we looked at Spotify, how they did stuff, but also try to figure out how we want to be as teams. And we compared ourselves at the beginning as a bit of the oil tanker. But we wanted to be more the sailing boats, right? We all sort of go the same way, but we all can go our own direction as long as we're adhering to the vision. But what you see is that autonomy is great, but you also see the downside of autonomy, that everyone thinks of their own solution, right? And everyone sort of knows that they have the right solution. And that can be fine from an internal perspective. But when you talk about APIs, then it would be really nice if APIs are consistent all over the place from a consumer perspective. And you see that there are so many different opinions. If we see the problem in our team, expose the API to the outside world, what kind of mess we sometimes see in the internal world, then we say, we can't have autonomy on certain decisions. We have to say, these are the API guidelines, these are the conventions, that this is the set you will have to follow. And if you have a different opinion, that's fine, but this is the set of conventions that we agreed upon or stated, and that's something that we want for the outside world. So that's what I mean with consistency in terms of consistent platform API trumps autonomy. Does that help? That makes sense? I don't know if you have stories about how autonomy is the other way sometimes. But
I heard this. Arnaud Lorette, he talks about like API governance, but more as a coaching practice than like a set of laws that are dictated to the developer team. Yes, we know we have a consistent practice of how we think it should be, but you think that you're an exception and that this should not apply to you, then come and have a talk with us. And then we both can learn something from it. I really love that model.
Yeah, that's what we try to do. So we have internal API guidelines, which was derived from the Zalando guidelines. And we had a group of people from different domains setting up the API guidelines, and we sort of broadcasted them. And the second iteration, we asked for a lot of input from the developer teams to sort of get a buy-in, right? So it's not our stuff, it's our company's API guidelines.
Yeah.
But I think in that case, a bit too autonomous and not strict enough. We haven't found the right balance, because still people could say, the guidelines, nice, but I'll do it my own way. And what you really want to know, these are the guidelines we would really like you to apply, and not just from the people who set up the guidelines, but also from management and even from directors. So this is what we're trying to achieve. So it's really good if you really try to do that. And like you said, if you're the exception, just let us know. But we see too often that people can take their own path. But that's more for the internal API guidelines. For the external API guidelines, we are more strict. But we can also map what they have inside to the outside world to fit our conventions. The more complex we've got to the outside world, if I want to hook up to a new API, then I know what to expect, because it all works the same.
With a programming language, new developers, junior developers who are novices and just learning the craft, they don't pick up on the paradigm of a programming language in the same way that a senior developer does. And a senior developer quickly, they can learn new languages, and they quickly understand the paradigm of the new language and what's different about this new language than the one that they've worked with before. And when you talk about your API standards, I'm wondering. So to me, achieving that level of having a paradigm that people recognize that this is the way this thing works, that is very powerful for a developer. And with APIs, especially being authored by agile teams in various parts of the company, it strikes me that it's more difficult to achieve that paradigm level. I mean, there's consistency and then there's paradigm, and the gap between consistency and paradigm can be a struggle. And the other extreme is you're very consciously reading a book, or that was each chapter was written by a different author, and that's so disconcerting. So where do you see where you are in the balance of that consistency versus paradigm?
I think we have done a decent job in promoting why we have certain standards from an outside perspective, and simply by sharing certain stories, right? And sharing input we get from partners, not to say that this is what we think. No, this is actually what our partners are saying. Because I think that is more powerful than maybe anything else. If the consumer says it's good, then who are we to argue with our consumers? And we have 14,000 consumers. So yeah, that is a lot. But I really like the idea to go from consistency to make it a more paradigm. I think that may be also what we're trying to achieve, right? Because it's not about the consistency itself, it's what you're trying to achieve with consistency. And that's a better developer experience, and that's a quicker first time to market with the API, and actually starting doing business through an automated way. Those are the goals behind it. But we might have to think about more on how to package that as paradigm. So do you have any suggestions on?
I don't. I asked the question because it strikes me that it's something that we haven't talked about, but as you were describing your organization, I thought about that, and related to that is the idea that company's culture gets reflected in its products. If you have a strong culture that's very customer focused, your APIs, I think, are going to also reflect that. I think that's possibly where you can start making that shift from just consistency to paradigm.
I think there's two aspects to this. One is like the paradigm of like how do we think about our APIs, and I think that's to some extent captured in your style guide, like how just making sure that there's consistent style of how you're doing things. Another aspect that is so I think there's these two tools. Like one is a style guide and the other one is domain modeling. What are the labels that you're using? Because I think a really big part of good UX is using the right words. And especially for APIs, this becomes even more important because
hell yeah,
it's all words.
Price in your APIs. So what kind of price? The total price, the discount price?
Yes.
Oh, it's terrible. Yeah, that's why we don't never tried to build a canonical data model. I think they're working on it right now, but it was also always quite difficult in interpreting a simple, obviously simple word, but then trying to get people to explain it, and you get all kinds of different explanations.
Yeah.
And sometimes you even get the same explanation, but it's used differently. Yeah. So naming things is an art form, but a really important art form. So yeah, sure.
So I think those two are probably two tools. I think Zdenek Nemek, he's working on some of this problem space. He built a modeling tool which is called Supermodel, and now he just raised money for his startup Superface, which is an automated API technology. You wouldn't have to know like who do you want to connect with. You could just kind of like say, oh, I want to know the weather, and then it can go and like connect with a bunch of different APIs to get the information that you need to get. So it's an interesting guy to watch. He was also one of our guests earlier.
Yeah, because I think you're right, and a simple get information API is simple, but when you talk about, for example, the replenishment API, those are different kinds of steps, and all those and I think there are like 8 endpoints now or 7 endpoints, and those endpoints can all adhere to all the API guidelines, all be clear, but still, as a created whole, be a mess.
Yeah.
So I think there are actually maybe three types of layers to the API modeling. And I think the latter one is the art form type, right? And that's what's really difficult to sort of incorporate that in a guideline. That's something you have to talk to people about, to actually discuss it with partners, and then you get a better design.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you feel that, if you feel the same way, if you understand what I'm trying to say.
I totally understand it. It's the user journey that you're walking with your API. It's like how the user experience that you're going to get when you're using the API, because is that well adjusted to the job that needs to be done and to the expectations that people have. Because to a big extent, UX is also like the collective consciousness of how things are being done. And that's a really, really hard thing, because that's an emergent property of the developer society, because it's the fact that enough people are doing the same kind of thing that makes it easier to do it that way, which makes it more of a standard, and that it really is an emergent property.
Yeah, I think we are trying to improve on that. So trying to implement linter type tooling, especially on the product APIs, trying to have the API guidelines as sort of the starting point instead of something that you do afterwards. So to incorporate those mindset more into the process to actually create better APIs. And you see with the new product teams that they're actually focusing a bit more on consumers. And I think one product actually started with, we don't start with building stuff. We first started talking 2 weeks long to all the different types of consumers and getting exactly clear what the requirements are before we start actually building anything.
Yeah.
So I really like that approach way more. And that's really difficult, right? Because engineers would like, I want to start building something. I want to deploy something. And then, no. So the mindset is difficult. I want to stifle their enthusiasm, but you have to focus on getting the stuff right first for what it means for our partner.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very interesting. I think we talked a lot about the complexity of all of this. And I think it's interesting because you're like, how have you seen this evolve? Because like you started, like you're an IT architect and you've evolved with the company. So how did this change over the years?
It's a broad question. So actually, I'm now a product owner or product manager of the product API, but I've started out as an IT architect. Yeah, how has this evolved? It's quite difficult because I've always seen it from an IT architect perspective, right? And I was there when they started building the first services. Actually, we used the SOA definition of a service. Then the microservices started to come about, and we actually saw our role more evolve from helping the teams define the microservice to more an abstract level of defining processes and the separation of concerns, etc. So, and I have to be honest, so the API mindset, I've only gotten that since like 3 years, since I started working in the API domain. Because before that, I was a lot focused on search. And looking in hindsight, I did see the difficulty in the microservice landscape, right? Because we had, within the search domain, we had the search engine. We all had also other type of microservices with certain functionality that was used by the outside world. And I think one of the constants that we had there was, shouldn't we build some kind of layer on top of it so that for the outside world, it obfuscates what is within the domain. And I think a lot of problems started to arise from that. And I think also our explosive growth is always going so fast, so we couldn't really stop thinking about, okay, what do we need right now? And how do we move forward? And we tried to do that. But that was really a difficult job as an architect. And architecture has evolved over the years. And I think in the beginning, we were really focused on of functionality, services, microservices, etc. But the more overarching principles, how do you do identity access management, for example? Or how do you do tracing or security, or all those kinds of different horizontal aspects always sort of drop to the background because there were always things that were happening now and need to be solved now. And then people started coming up with ideas for which they needed an architectural solution, like we did for our French app, or like in the back in days when we first started doing the marketplaces. And of course, we wouldn't have got where we are if we didn't do that, right? We tried to sort of come up with really quick solutions, which were not pretty, and hope that they succeed so that afterwards we can correct them. But some things we are still correcting from 10, 15 years ago, because there's always something new on the horizon, like the featureitis I was talking about.
Yeah.
And so in terms of that, I really like the idea that we sort of took one step back and rethought our organization. Like, how do we be agile? How are we agile at scale? How can we evolve more into a product organization to solve certain problems? But you do see it's still a bit of a struggle on how to move that, because it meant reorganizing certain things, which is never nice, and really thinking about, okay, but what are the products then? And that is still a difficult thing. And I think it won't be solved this year. I think it will always be an ongoing evolution of any type of company that grows really fast. But it's been quite a roller coaster. I think I was around employee number 300, and now we have almost 3,000. And they're still coming in by the buses every month, so to say. It's good to be at a company that grows so fast, but you do see the struggles that you go through as a company. And sometimes you would like to go back like a few years and say, okay, but do you know that in a few years we'll be facing this problem? So let's please do this right now. And we won't face that problem. But yeah, that's always in hindsight. And that's the experience that, that makes you more valuable, I guess.
One book that I was really fascinated by in the DevOps space is Team Topologies. I'm sure you've read it. So
I'm in the process of I've read the first few chapters. Yeah.
Okay. Because it's this idea of restructuring your organization around value flows, organizing around customer focus and customer contact, and then like the parts that don't work that way, like having like platforms and enabling teams and stuff like that. Does this spark any thoughts or ideas?
Yeah, so I haven't read the book fully yet, so it's a bit difficult to answer that. But I think the first few chapters really resonate about how to give teams a bit of a purpose, so they know what they're part of, to enable them to add value to something.
Yeah.
Right. And that was maybe also part of the product reorganization, agile at scale, right? Teams were doing stuff, but they couldn't see the whole anymore.
Yeah.
So I think maybe a product organization would help them, because they would feel more part of a product, so they would know a bit more about, okay, what am I actually doing and what am I actually doing it for? But also my team is, because we are an API team, we don't own any functionality or business domain functionality. We just practically proxy business functionality to the outside world in a consistent and stable way. Mm-hmm. And we're now at sort of a tipping point. So how do we redefine our team's purpose? And how do we fit in one of those topologies to really give the team a sense of purpose for the coming year, right? And not just be a team that just ports one API to the outside world. So and you see teams struggling with that. Some teams have really clear and purpose. But yeah, I think we have over 100 Scrum teams, so I can't speak for all the teams. But for us, it's a bit challenging. But I think that also has to do a bit with the domain that we're in, right? In terms of autonomy, we can't be really autonomous because we depend on other domain teams to build stuff. So we have a different, we need a different approach on how to do that.
Yeah, it's because on the one hand, you're a platform team that enables others, but at the same time, you're serving customers. So you're also a stream-aligned team. And maybe you're even like, there's a lot of complex subsystems in there, probably. Yeah.
Yeah, Also sorts of infrastructure, funny things going on all the time. Yeah. Jack of all trades, sometimes we name ourselves.
So thank you so much, Maarten, for joining us today. It was a great discussion, and I definitely left with some new insights and some new ways of thinking about things. You could probably
Yeah.
see I was scribbling the whole time. I was
Yeah.
trying to scribble quietly so my mic didn't pick it up. But it was
Yeah.
really interesting. It's a pleasure to
Yeah.
meet you.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for having me. It was good. Yeah. I learned some new things and had some new thoughts as well.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Mark.
It's our hope that you were encouraged by today's story and picked up some insights that will help you navigate your digital transformation and make your API program more successful. If you have questions or feedback on the podcast, we invite you to email us at info@prenovix.com. Thanks for listening.